Thank you and good morning. So I find it interesting listening to the talk so far this morning, the great amount of commonality, which I guess suggests that there's more agreement on the themes here than might have been believed before we started. Also says that half of what I'm going to tell you, you've already seen. Clearly, we're in a market that's growing very rapidly, as we've been presented several times so far. We're shipping billions of parts, not quite the trillions that Kionix would like us to be at, but obviously a lot of parts. And so I think it's very timely and interesting that Kionix has presented kind of this challenge of, can this be a $1 trillion market? And if so, what would it take to get there? Again, a little review of history that's kind of been talked about, but I put it up here just to point out that this has all occurred awfully recently. You go back to what was at that time the IBM ThinkPad in somewhere around October of 2003. They did drop detection using a 2.5-axis accelerometer. Seagate, not long after that, integrated the accelerometer for drop detection into the hard drive itself. Samsung had, I think, the first phone in the marketplace that had an accelerometer in it somewhere in early 2005. But what clearly made the consumer electronics market for inertial sensors blossom was the iPhone and the Wii, which both brought motion sensing into the public eye, got it in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and other journals of choice. And the market exploded. Kionix, just briefly for those of you who are not familiar with us, we were started in 1993 based on technology that came out of Cornell University. Our business is to do MEMS, and out of this grand world of MEMS so far, specifically inertial sensors, accelerometers, gyroscopes. We focus predominantly on consumer electronics, though a little bit in the automotive world as well. And as was mentioned in the introduction, about a little over 2 years ago, we were acquired by Rome. So us as a microcosm of this industry, you can see our unit growth rate there on the right, which is almost a doubling in units year over year, much as the data Kionix put up. And that's us not being the biggest player in the industry yet, doing it mostly in consumer electronics and mostly just with accelerometers. So there's a huge opportunity to grow in this marketplace and grow rapidly. Motion sensing gets a lot of the attention. Certainly the accelerometers and gyroscope adoption in handsets has been a major unit driver in the industry. We've gone, as was earlier mentioned, from single-axis airbag accelerometers to multiple axes, 3-axis, different combinations, different ranges. We've added gyroscopes, we go into magnetometers for direction, pressure sensors for altitude, and then, as was in the last presentation, this whole proliferation of non-motion sensing devices moving into the chemical sensors, biological sensors. And since we have both Yole and iSupply here today, I had to choose data from both of them so they don't get mad at me. So this is a Jean-Christophe data showing, as has been shown already, the large rapid growth up into the tens of billions of dollars, but not yet quite trillions of dollars, and the rapid proliferation of different end market applications of the MEMS technologies. So why has it grown so rapidly? And again, I think some of the earlier presentations have addressed a lot of this, but the first piece is mobility, right? We consumers now have sophisticated personal devices that are rapidly becoming indispensable to us. We have them with us all the time, everywhere we go, particularly if you're under the age of 18. You have them permanently attached to you. And these devices are interconnected with each other and ultimately through the internet with the rest of the world, and they share information whether you wish them to or not. And all of this is also leading to devices that are self-aware. So the situational awareness leading to that device being more user-friendly. The simplest example is screen rotation in the phone, right? I mean, we would all find it highly awkward if when we rotate our phone, we had to push a button to tell the screen to change orientation. It should know how to do that automatically, which it does. And we'll talk more examples of these, but it's just basically the device itself understands the environment it's in, what it's happening to it, what it's being used for, and it responds appropriately without further intervention on the part of its user. So 2 examples of that. One, as has been mentioned, a moderate to high-end automobile has some 100+ MEMS sensors in it today. The more well-known sensing are for the safety systems, but I'd like to also highlight here kind of some of the user interface functions, if you will. Maybe not how we usually think of it in an automobile, but the things the car just does for you now that you used to have to do as the driver of it. So, it turns lights on and headlights on and off when it needs them. Turns the windshield wipers on when it needs it, changes the speed of the windshield wipers based on how much rain is hitting the windshield. Call comes into your cell phone, which is Bluetooth connected to your car, it turns the audio down while you answer the call. More, from a technology point of view, all these are very simple things to do, but have been enabled by these low-cost sensors, proliferation of sensors, making better use of the data and the information that's available, and resulting in a better user interface to you, the driver. Phone, similar set of things, screen rotation, ambient light sensing, proximity sensing, ever greater megapixel cameras, ever more microphones to actually improve audio quality, since apparently there's still someone who speaks on their cell phone and talks with it as opposed to just playing games. Location-based services, RF MEMS, power management by knowing what the phone's doing, how's it being used, is it laying still on the table, is it being used for a phone call, is it face up or face down, do I want it to answer, do I not want it to answer, all sorts of situational awareness made possible through the sensors. So the evolution of MEMS so far has been, ever smaller physical packages, greater functionality in those smaller packages, diversity of applications, lower power consumption, and the one that our customers like best, lower cost. Yet there's also growing complexity in both the hardware and the software. So, example of Kionix products going 5x5 millimeter 3-axis accelerometer in the mid-2000s down to now 2x2, yet in the smaller package is actually more functionality than there was in the big package and dramatically lower cost. Hardware becomes more complicated. There's lots and lots of sensors that want to talk to the hardware. They have to be supported. There are lots of different processors that have to be supported with the data coming out of the sensor. And by the way, they'd like the sensor guys to do more and more of the processing of this data before sending it up the architecture chain. Sensors need to get integrated or fused. Customers don't really want to look at raw acceleration data, raw gyroscope data. They want to know, is the phone face up or face down? Am I pointing north? What am I doing? And don't bother me with all this sensor data. As Rich from HP mentioned, the market driver here is what you do with the sensor information. It's not the sensor information itself. And And then there's growing software complexity, because as the world has decided these sensors are interesting, people want to be able to talk to sensors. Now we have operating systems that are starting to define what sensors they think should be there, and us sensor manufacturers have to go support all of these different and ever-changing operating systems. And what's next? I think we've had several presentations already this morning on where that might be. You know, location-based services, long predicted, slow in coming, but certainly starting to take reality. Augmented reality is gaining in popularity, and as has already been mentioned a couple of times, one that we also feel is probably so-called next big thing is healthcare. Not really mentioned too much so far today is one of the biggest challenges in this, is how do you actually make any money? So this is now Jeremy's data, but you see over this kind of 10-year time period, prices of these 4 different popular sensors for the cell phones going from the above dollars to multiple dollars down to tens, 20s of cents. So it's, you know, great that there's high demand for these devices, but a lot of that high demand is only a result of how cheap they can be supplied. So, not to repeat Giannis's presentation, but he had these postulates as to how you would get us to $1 trillion marketplace. I want to start making a little bit more of a distinction between units and economics. So let's think about this proposition from the point of view of the world's gross domestic product, which in 2010 was $63 trillion. So $1 trillion MEMS market would be just shy of 2% of the world's GDP. If we take just the US, for which I can more readily get data, use that as a proxy, the US was approximately 23% of the world's GDP. The only subset within the US GDP that was greater than $1 trillion was healthcare, as has already been mentioned. So if the US is 23% of the world's GDP, then we should have 23% of a $1 trillion market for MEMS within the US, $230 billion MEMS market. Well, 230 billion is 2.2% of the personal consumption expenditures, or 6% of the total goods consumed in the United States. So you can see $1 trillion MEMS component market is a pretty significant fraction of any gross macroeconomic measure. Another way to kind of work into this is, let's look at the difference of MEMS as a component versus MEMS-enabled end products. So we'll look at a couple of the most popular MEMS end products, and you can see again this high elasticity of demand. So looking at the iPhones and the Wiis and so forth, and I won't swear by these numbers, some are more readily available, some are more guesses, but you can see that in general the MEMS parts are some 2% of the end cost of the end product. So gives you a hint partially as to why there's such great demand for the MEMS devices, is they're enabling a whole lot of features here that really sell that end product, but they're a rather small fraction of the bill of materials. So we'll, for sake of argument, say it averages 2%. So if MEMS components were $1 trillion market and they represented 2% of the bill of materials, that'd be a $50 trillion market for those end products, which would be 80% of the world's gross domestic product, just from MEMS-enabled devices. You dig a little deeper, go through the US GDP and say, okay, what are the end products that could use MEMS? So consumer electronics, automobiles, and so forth. That's approximately a $1.6 trillion marketplace. That The US is 23%, says it's a $7 trillion end market worldwide. At 2%, MEMS would be 140 billion. And if we say that we continue to grow at 15% over the next 10 years, that would grow to a $500 billion marketplace. So, conclusions. $1 trillion MEMS component market, Giannis? I don't think so. I'd be more than happy to be proven wrong, too. A trillion unit MEMS market, I think, is a near certainty. $1 trillion market for MEMS-enabled products is a given. So it says that this is a very exciting industry to be part of, even if we don't quite make it to $1 trillion. Thank you.
Very nice. Questions?
Since I saw the price goes down over time for inertial sensors, do you think, because Kionix is really on the consumer area, do you think more combo sensor will be more taken off at some point with the smartphone area or the other mobile devices? Because I think the combo sensor to be more attractive would be the price of the combo sensor has to be cheaper than individual sensor.
Right. So combo sensors, we could have a very healthy debate amongst participants here. And we don't have time for that, so I won't go down that path. But your basic point is correct. The price of the sensors has to keep going down. If combining them is a means to lowering the total price, then that is what will happen. But whether they're standalone or combinations, the prices are continuing to drop and drop very rapidly across all the different application areas.
No more questions? All right, let's thank our speaker.